Hi, everybody. This is Bill Kenny with Test My Pitch. I hope you're doing great, and I really want to welcome you to the webinar today. We do have a very robust agenda, and you'll see when I do turn the show you the questions that have been asked, you'll see that we've got just a great number of questions, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. So it's what I'm going to do now is switch over to the screen share so you can see my slides. I'll go off camera for a bit here, and then when we go to the Q&A part, I'll pop back on camera. But I wanted to say hi, and I'm really looking forward to your thoughts, and certainly I do invite you to ask questions as we're going through this. And again, we're going to really prioritize getting to your questions as quickly as possible. Okay, you should see my slides now. Today's webinar is called Criteria Conundrum: Developing Your Ultimate Pitch Evaluation Rubric. So what we've seen is organizations really struggling with not just building great criteria, but really the whole evaluation and judging process. And so we're going to take a real good look at these today. And again, we're going to, as much as possible, prioritize getting to your questions. So our audience today, just so you have some framing, is fairly diverse. We have corporate innovation professionals, we have educators, many from universities and some from high schools, as well as student programs. And we also have some economic developments, primarily from incubators and accelerators from around the country. And in fact, we're being viewed, I believe, by actually folks on 4 continents right now. So that's pretty fun as well. And welcome to everybody. So this is actually a pared down version of all the questions we've gotten. We've actually combined some of them, and this is going to be great because we're going to spend a decent amount of our time today really walking through these questions, and certainly we invite you to submit additional questions. You can do that through whether you're watching this via YouTube or Google Plus. You can do that. There should be an icon in the top right-hand corner of your screen to allow you to submit additional questions, and we certainly would love that, and we'd love to respond to any as well. I should say that we're going to do our best to answer these on the call. There may be a few that we want, we'll give some answer to, but that would take more time, and we certainly invite one-on-one conversations on any of these, and maybe also to say that we're going to come at these from our experience and perspective, and it may be that we need more information from you to answer your specific question. So again, we'll get to these, and it'll be I think we'll get hopefully some good, real good information for you. So many of you know Steve Blank. For those that don't, he's probably one of the most known and recognized thought leaders in terms of entrepreneurship, development, and business building in the world today. And so he said, this is now about 2 years ago, he said, incubator demo days encourage founders and investors to judge startups on the wrong criteria. And this has actually been our experience as well, in that it's not actually, I think, not just the criteria, but the judging processes tend to really challenge creating reliable results, and therefore good decisions, and ultimately good learning, because that however we recognize individuals, that really becomes a benchmark for those that are in whatever program to mimic and follow. And if our results don't resemble what they should, then unfortunately people are going to be elevating the wrong examples or following the wrong examples. And so we want to make sure that not only the criteria is appropriate, but the processes get us to those both good decisions and good examples. So our agenda is pretty straightforward here. We're going to talk about some of the common challenges with judging. We're going to talk about remedies and things that you can do within your situation and organization. We'll talk about developing the best rubric, the selection and orientation of judges, and then we'll share with you our criteria development worksheet, which hopefully will be helpful for you. And then we'll get into your questions. So just so you know a little bit about me, I founded a company called Test My Pitch. We, as an organization, go to 100, actually, probably somewhere near 200 pitch events annually. So we tend to see a lot of these, and these are really all over the country, and we consult with organizations all over the world. And so we get really we're getting pretty good insight into where the challenges are, and maybe what some of the best practices should be. Yeah, the disclaimer really is very simple, and I already pretty much stated it, but we haven't seen everything. And so, we really do these both to share what we've learned and also to invite dialogue. We'd love to hear what you're seeing and what you're learning and where you're challenged. And certainly part of our follow-up will be to ask for those types of conversations. Just so you know a little bit about us, and that way we can sort of frame this conversation. Test My Pitch is built on two tools. So Test My Pitch itself is an online platform that, if you know what Toastmasters is, it's very much like taking the idea of Toastmasters and putting it online. So we create private online communities where individuals, could be students, it could be professionals within organizations, or it could be entrepreneurs, develop their communication skills. And so our customers are typically educations, sort of slash universities, economic development organizations, a lot of incubators, accelerators, and sort of government consulting organizations that work with professionals, business entrepreneurs, and so on. And then some enterprise customers. And then Score My Pitch is a pitch event judging and feedback system. So Score My Pitch, number one, replaces the piece of paper that judges might use, but it really does a lot more than that. It creates much more reliable results. There are some techniques within the system that make the results much more reliable, and ultimately provides very quick results, and also gives volumes of contextual feedback for the ventures, entrepreneurs, employees who are being judged. So on to the webinar. Okay, so really the first part here is to talk a little bit about the criteria's relationship to reliable judging. So reliable judging has several components, certainly one of which is criteria, but there ultimately are several others that are important, and they need to all work together to create that results that can be thought to be both reliable and actionable. And so the purpose of a pitch event, having been to a bunch, we've really kind of narrowed this down to three general purposes that we see in most pitch events. There are some that are around engagement. In other words, they're community building, and really meant to be very inviting to get people into the movie. The second type are educational, and so those would be ones where we want to we have a cohort or a following, and we're really looking to get them to the next level. And the third are around funding, and this, we're not really talking about prize money, because those can happen at any level, but we're really talking about funding as in sort of meaningful funding, venture, angel type funding for ventures. And just so this is contextual, only about 1%, in fact, just slightly less than 1% of startup businesses in the US get funding, either from angels or venture. So those are definitely a much smaller number. Now, if we take that sort of idea and sort of reflect on sort of that the types of pitch events, and then put them against what we normally see as program stages. And this could be, again, within sort of an economic development environment where we're in an accelerator or incubator. It could be in a university situation or in a corporation. Often programs go in these three stages. There's sort of an open tent where we want people to come in and get into the environment, into the community, and that's sort of the engagement stage. Then we're going to be doing education, and then we're going to be doing potentially doing funding. In other words, we're going to pick the best ideas and support them in one or variety of ways. There's sort of another way to look at this, and the first two stages stay the same, But the third stage is really, maybe less focused on funding than it is appropriate preparation for exit. And so, whether you're sort of graduating from a university or exiting out of an accelerator or incubator, there are other resources in the greater ecosystem that could be advantaged. And ultimately, the goal would be, again, whether or not funding is appropriate, that the ventures, that the teams are prepared to advantage themselves and most of all the resources that are available, and ultimately make a venture that is highly successful. And so we want to look at sort of these and understand, because how we create criteria really depends quite a bit on what stage we're trying to address and what the real goals are. And really quite a bit of the challenge we see is that mismatch that happens where, the wrong sort of criteria are being applied to the wrong stage. And this kind of leads us into the sort of the top challenges that we see with judging. Number one is that organizers sometimes are serving the wrong audience. And I'll give you an example. We actually had a conversation with a prospective client this week, and they were talking about the fact that they wanted to be able to accommodate judges who showed up to their events late. In other words, the pitches had already started, maybe one or two or three teams had already pitched, and they wanted to be able to accommodate that judge. They also wanted to accommodate the judge that could leave early in some situations. And so the challenge of this is, they want to, that as we ask them about their judges, and their judges are sponsors or, sort of benefactors in some way of the organization. And in our mind, they're really trying to serve the wrong audience. And ultimately, that sponsor is going to probably feel much better sponsoring an organization that has significant integrity around their product. And in this case, the product it could be the students or the entrepreneurs or the staff members who are looking to forward their venture. But the idea of having somebody judge only some of the ventures that are pitching really is a huge problem with the reliability of judging, because you're not, there are judges that are easier, there are judges that are harder, and they're not all exactly the same. And in fact, that's why we want them. We want the different perspectives in order to have a complete picture or a more complete picture. And if some have, some of the pitchers or ventures experience sort of scores from 5 judges, and a few experience sort of the views of only 4 judges, then that information doesn't aggregate together very well, and it's really difficult to reconcile that, and I'd say even impossible, because you can't replace one judge with another, or that they're not all equal. And so the idea that we can take one out and expect to have reliability is challenging. So we want to make sure we before we start the process, we determine who it is we're going to prioritize serving. And if ideally it's the ventures or the entrepreneurs and so on, and we align our objectives first with that audience, and then ultimately, if we have to talk to a judge about the fact that they showed up late, and maybe it's something we even say, hey, if we understand if you end up showing up late, but if you do, just understand, in order for us to have reliability in our judging, we're going to have to ask that you'll judge the next event, but you're not going to judge this one. We want to make sure that our ventures get sort of the most reliable feedback that they can. And again, each situation is a little different, but we want to make sure we serve the right audience. The second issue is misaligned criteria. So going back to those stages, quite often we see organizations who are sort of applying sometimes more sophisticated criteria than the stage, and sometimes less sophisticated criteria than the stage, or just totally sort of non-related criteria to the objectives that they do have. So we want to make sure that we have good alignment. Um, this can be a large challenge. The idea of orienting both the judges and the ventures, and in some cases, we see little or no orientation. And so, the idea that number one, the ventures, the entrepreneurs coming in, should know far in advance how they can succeed. We want to set them up for success. And so that means knowing the criteria and knowing the context of the criteria, knowing how they're going to be judged and so on, and the expectations. And then the judges need to be oriented to that. Ideally, maybe a week or a few days before, or at very least on site, and so that they have a good sense of how they should be evaluating these ventures and really what stage the ventures are at, so that they put those, they have the context of sort of what's going on as well. Score skewing. So this is something that happens not just when evaluating pitches, but it happens in figure skating and gymnastics and any type of judged event. Is that there's you may have judge fatigue, or you just may have skewing. And skewing is really where judges' scores fluctuate as they go through. So this is sort of irrespective of if they're an easy judge or hard judge from a judging standpoint. This really has to do with the variation that happens as they set a baseline, and then as they potentially fatigue if it's a long event. And so normally what you'll see is after the third or fourth performance and the third or fourth pitch is that the judges generally will get easier. And that normally will happen if there's the better the pitches are early, the more you'll see them get easier. And then the reverse can happen if the first few pitches are not so good, is they'll get sort of harder after the first few pitches. And so ultimately, unfortunately, if you score on paper, you'll never see this. You won't really have a good sense of this. But because we have an electronic tool that does this, we get to see it, and we also have built in some normalization techniques that help minimize or mitigate that issue. And the last challenge, and this actually can be really dramatic, and unfortunately, a lot of organizers don't get to see this because the organizer sort of gets the event together, and not every event sort of has this issue, but the events that where the judges sort of judge and then they caucus or have a meeting after they judge to talk about who they thought won. What will happen in here, and this happens if the judges don't have a view of the results when they begin that conversation. And of course, if you're judging on paper, it would be very rare that they'd have a view of the results. They go into that room and they have to spend 15 or more minutes developing a sense of each other's perspective. Whereas if you're using an electronic tool, then you actually have those results, and the judge's conversation is sort of from their consensus forward. In other words, they see the results electronically, and then their conversation is about adjusting those if appropriate. And if they don't have a view of what they just scored and their consensus, then they have to spend a lot of time talking to sort of identify their consensus in a verbal way. And what you'll see happen here is that more often than not, there's a louder person. There's somebody either more charismatic or more passionate, and they will unduly influence everyone else in the room. And there may be two people that are more charismatic or passionate or whatnot. But no matter what, there is going to be a disparity between the sort of intensity for which individuals discuss their ideas and advocate for the people that they think won. And so you end up with results that really aren't a view of all the judges' points of view, but much more a view of one or two judges' points of view. And you sort of took away all the benefits of having a panel of whatever number of judges you have. And so this can be a really big challenge, and we'll talk about some techniques to mitigate that as we go through. So let's get into some of the remedies specifically and really talk about these. So the idea of developing your best rubric is really built on a few different thoughts. And let's sort of take a look at a couple of rubrics or a couple of scorecards so that you have a sense of maybe how some look. So these are actually real scorecards that organizations have used, or I should say ballots that organizations have used, and this is represented on our Score My Pitch system. And so you'll see this particular organization, they had in this event, they had 8 criteria split up into 2 categories. So fairly complex. And these were only, I believe these were 3-minute pitches. And so you'll see when we go to the next scorecard, it's a little bit lighter. And this one, we would say this is fairly aggressive for 3-minute pitches, because what ends up happening is that you have a real trade-off here between the numeric scores and what can be given in terms of qualitative feedback. And so the more criteria that we have, typically the less qualitative feedback that the judges are able to give, because they're spending so much time scoring each pitch. And so part of developing good criteria is to sort of think how long the pitches are, what kind of time we're going to give judges to do their scoring, because they can't really score in completely until not only the pitches happen, but also the Q&A has happened. So the more criteria we have, the more time they need between pitches to sort of finalize their scores. And so you have to think about that. So let's just look at the next ballot here. So here's another ballot. Instead of 8 criteria, they have 5. And again, this was a real set of criteria used by an organization that's using our platform. And in this case, these, I believe, again, were 3-minute pitches. But what you'll find is that with the way you manage this will allow your judges to perform how you want them. If you're at an early stage event, you probably want more qualitative feedback. You may be making funding decisions, though. It may be within an angel organization or some type of investment organization where it may make sense. And typically, you're going to have longer pitches, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, maybe more. And you may want to go up to 12 or even 15 criteria so that you really get very discrete, specific information in terms of each person's point of view on each critical factor in terms of making that investment decision. But more often than not, the most events are really focused around either engagement or education, and so it's really about sort of how do we sort of make the decision in terms of what are the sort of critical success factors, and how do we balance between those, and making sure that there's time for judges to put in enough qualitative feedback so that the students or ventures or staff get really sort of actionable feedback when they're done. So let's go back to the program stages. And again, we're kind of keeping this within the context of how do we make good criteria decisions. So when we're looking at this graphic and we're thinking about criteria, we really want at the early stages, at the engagement stage, for our criteria to be focused on gaining commitment. We want people to sort of get, part of the goal of this event is to get them to the next event. And in some cases, sort of their first event, that's almost the only goal. And so the criteria should be developed in a way that causes people to come back for their second experience. And I've seen sort of first experience engagement events where they, essentially are using exit or funding level criteria, and it's so discouraging for the participants. People don't come back, and it sort of loses the meaning. And then as we go down through the engagement stage and towards the exit or funding stage, our feedback and our criteria should be much more focused on improvement and ultimately be more direct. And so we want to sort of first determine what stage we're dealing with, and then adjust our criteria to be appropriate for that stage. Another way to look at this or think of it is that early on we're focused on form, and as we move through the process, as our cohort, as our individuals who are pitching get more sophisticated, we want to focus more on substance. And we may sort of flip, sort of go from 90% focused on form and 10% on substance early on, and we may go down, sort of all the way down to sort of 90% focus on substance and 10% focused on form at the bottom, or whatever the appropriate number is. And so, again, it's really about balancing those so that we attend to our audience and what stage they're at and the objectives that we have for them. So, one of the outputs of a successful set of criteria and a successful evaluation is that a good process will generate volumes of actionable feedback. And so when feedback is actionable, there are really two components that are important. One is the sort of quantitative side, and easy to relate that to the instruments on the dashboard of our car. So those instruments give us numbers. It gives us very specific data that allows us to make better decisions in terms of the operation of our car. And if we took away this quantitative feedback, the operation of our car would be, the successful operation for a period of time would be really difficult, if not totally impossible. Likewise, if this was the only input we had, the operation of our car would be totally impossible, because we need another set of information, and that's the qualitative set of information that we get. And that's what we can see with our eyes. It's looking out the windows, it's the rear view mirror, it's being able to look out the side windows and the windshield. And this qualitative input ultimately qualifies what we're seeing on our dashboard. In other words, if we start seeing our heat gauge go up and we start seeing steam come out of the hood, then we know our car, if there may be something pretty soon we have to deal with. And so we want to make sure that, sort of the system we design gives our ventures this type of feedback. So they not only get qualitative, but they also get quantitative feedback. And this is what we call contextual feedback, so that they ultimately know when you say that they scored a 3 or a 4 on something, on one criteria, that gets qualified and contextualized by the text comments that are made, or the volume of text comments are made on that particular issue, so that they very much understand how to go from being sort of marginal or average to being superior. And that's when they make better decisions. And this is really challenging in most situations, because most organizations at very best only provide oral feedback, which is and it may not be all the judges together. It may just be catching someone on the way out the door, and that can be exceptionally challenging, because it's not all perspectives. It's just this particular individual's perspective, and you're getting it orally, which means you're at best getting qualitative information. They're on their way out the door, so it's probably fairly superficial and ultimately not very actionable. And they may give you some good comments, but you can't contextualize them, because you don't know how to weight each comment, or how each comment compares to how the other judges viewed you. So it's very difficult for individuals to improve their skills with abstract feedback. And maybe another way to look at this is that our learning styles as individuals, as humans, we are very much visual learners. So 65% of the American population are visual learners, and this is, I think, pretty normal for most humans. And only 30% are auditory or listening learners. And so if we're only getting our feedback auditorially, unfortunately, we're missing the most dominant learning style that is really predominant in most individuals. And so making sure that we give visual feedback that people can react to will really add to an individual's ability to contextualize and learn and grow much quicker. So what might that look like? And again, this is sort of represented on our tool, because it's pretty easy for us to do this. And you'll see this is a totally different set of criteria, totally different organization. And these are, in fact, real results from an event. And so you'll see the scores under each of the 3 criteria: model, product, and user interface design. And these are average scores from 5 judges. And so what you're seeing is that an individual can learn an incredible amount just even by just looking at their own information, just looking across the top venture here, pop-up shops. They can see their scores, so they get the quantitative information. Then they can go across and look at the qualitative information. We can see here on the screen their strengths, and then if we could go a little further to the right, we'd see their recommendations. But just so you have a sense of this, this is giving us about 9 times more text feedback. In other words, qualitative feedback than we would get if we were using paper. Plus, it's all legible, which makes it even more operationally efficient. And so, as an individual, I can learn. If all I saw was my own information, I can learn an incredible amount from this in terms of how do I improve. And in fact, this is maybe another good example in that this team, pop-up shops, was first. But you'll see, if we were grading them, they're still only at about 80%. In other words, they had a 3.93 out of a 5 scale. So, and we haven't seen yet anyone that wins a pitch competition. We haven't seen anyone pitch perfectly. And unfortunately, when most people win pitch competitions and leave and they're told they're the best, even the winners have no sense of how they can improve. They don't know that they're only 80% of the way there. They don't know that they're 75 or 70% or 60% of the way there when they win. They just know they won. And so they ultimately that's not very satisfying. And so that individual can learn by looking at this to a large degree, but there's a lot more learning that can happen. And so we can referentially learn as well. So being able to, if we're on Deja U or Credit Spring or any of the teams that are further down, the idea that we could referentially learn from knowing how we did and how we performed in the comments we got, and comparing that to the team that ranked first or second, and being able to model and leverage that performance to learn and develop quicker. The same sort of phenomenon happens in a lot of competitive events. Let's take running as an example. If you ran in a 5K, and no matter where you finished, you could look at the results, that day on the internet and be able to determine, who are reference points for you, and maybe even make them training partners, maybe even model them, maybe learn from them, ask them questions about how they train, how they prepare, what they eat before, all different types of things. The same thing can be done in entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship development. And sort of the final way that this can be used, and probably long term the most advantageous, is that these results, if we democratize them, if we share them broadly, can really have the biggest effect. Because if we're really, most of us are working to build a community, we're not just concerned about today's cohort, we're concerned about tomorrow's and next year's and the next several years cohorts. If this information can be shared more broadly, and again, going back to that running example, before any runner goes to compete in an event, they will look literally months, maybe even years ahead at the organization's webpage where of that event that they're going to go to, and they'll look at previous year's results, previous results from the event they're going to compete in, and they'll be able to see reference times, reference performance, reference individuals who they can model and imagine. So you think of it in the running context, those runners have the ability, that the future runners have the ability to stand on the shoulders of previous participants, previous cohorts, and perform better. And that's why running, or many athletics, you see evolution. You see us breaking the 4-minute mile, and then we get even faster and people perform even better because they have lots of reference points and they can learn from the learning that's already happened. And what we see in entrepreneurship education or development is almost a Neanderthal sort of approach, in that we sort of force everybody to start at the beginning without reference points. And so, developing a system like this, or using a system like this, allows you to have future cohorts stand on the shoulders of past participants and perform even better. So sort of thinking of your criteria and your judging process in a sort of a much more holistic way can create incredible value and incredible opportunity. And in fact, expand your community, because now people coming in know much more of what to expect. There's much less fear. You've sort of taken down the curtain and sort of shown the process. Yeah, it's funny, if we were talking about sort of arts education, we would, there is critiquing in arts education, and that's just an enormous part of what they do, and so, and that's a very public process, and that happens whether you're in performing arts or in visual arts, whatever the case is, and it's, it's a big part of how people that are developing their art skills learn and develop. So next, let's talk about selecting and orienting judges. And so this is kind of a really important and sort of critical step. And so, thinking again about what stage the individuals are that we're going to be judging should be part of the process of how we select judges. And so, we might look at investors or executives. We might look at sponsors, faculty, entrepreneurs, mentors, and others who could be meaningful in giving the right evaluation for the ventures and participants who are at, sort of whatever stage they're at, and aligning those things is sort of really key. In some cases, just because of what our organization is, we might want to bring in individuals who, we want to sort of shine a spotlight on the judges. In other words, judging, allowing you to judge is sort of allowing you to get face time in front of the room, and that can work out well as well. But ultimately, it's a matter of, sort of very much getting as much as we can alignment with the background and skills of an individual, with being able to assess and give feedback to these ventures. And it's not a problem, and it's not a big deal if they also get some benefits from judging. That's not inherently a problem, as long as they have, at least some of the skills that will help give good perspective to the people who are being judged. And so what does the judge's orientation look like? It really has a few key components. You may add some others depending on your event, but certainly the biggest issue, and this is what we see unfortunately left out of most orientations we see, if there are orientations, and that is really the context or purpose of the event. And the purpose of the event qualifies the criteria. And most organizations spend tons of time in terms of developing the criteria. We get lots of questions about criteria, and they're important, but even more important than the criteria is the context. In other words, the judges need to know what stage these ventures are at, or these ideas are at, or these individuals are at, in order to understand the context of the criteria, because you want them to apply the criteria in a way that aligns with the stage and the purpose of the event. And so, the context might be as simple as, we're evaluating these for, which idea is most scalable and fundable. It may be on the engagement, so that's sort of maybe a more exit oriented context. On the engagement end, we might be evaluating for who communicated their idea the best. In other words, which idea do we actually really understand versus the others? Which one was explained in a way that was exciting and compelling, and it's not about the idea, it's not about its sort of potential in the market or any of that. It's just simply who communicated the best. So again, if the judges don't understand the context, then they absolutely cannot apply the criteria in the way you intend. And unfortunately, what you end up seeing, if there's no context, is you end up seeing a huge disparity in terms of how judges apply the criteria. So it really challenges the quality of judging. And then more to get them comfortable with the environment they're going to go into. What's the event format? Sort of how long are the pitches? Is there a Q&A? How long is that? Is there a judges meeting afterwards? What are the expectations? Those kinds of things. Do they have a break in the middle if it's a long event? Things like that. What's the scoring process, how they're going to be scoring, and what the expectations are there. And again, is there going to be a judges meeting or caucus at the end to determine winners? And maybe you want to have a lead judge to sort of run that process. Maybe someone you've oriented even before in terms of their responsibilities in terms of running that process. So the sort of evolution of feedback, and this sort of brings sort of full circle the idea of how we want to construct things. So we want to go, as people move from novice to expert, we want to move from positive to direct, and again, from commitment to improvement. And so we want to align our criteria with and all of our process with that. So again, if the judges are coming in and they're going to be working with novices, we want to make sure they're tuned in to be excited and positive and reinforcing and all those types of things. On the other hand, if we have an advanced group that's coming in more at the expert level, it would be really bad for them to get superficial feedback. Those people actually want and invite, they want to learn, they want to evolve, and they'll be very dissatisfied if what they get is not substantive. They want to get, feedback that they can action and get to the next level. So the next sort of, we've kind of now, how do we prep the judges? Now, how do we get the receivers, in other words, the ventures or entrepreneurs, sort of ready? And this is really about, tuning them in, because as we all know, some people are ready to hear and some people are not. And this is actually where we can really make the biggest difference, because we can do all the other things really well, but if we haven't properly oriented the ventures, the students or entrepreneurs or staff, then all of that will have been for naught, because they won't hear what it is we're communicating. And so really the first notion is, and we see many organizations sort of, I say many, that we see it enough organizations that sort of hide behind the idea that, we can't possibly share what the judges are saying on their ballots with the cohort or students or entrepreneurs, because it's not perfect. It's not exactly what we would say. And the real key that we've learned, and this has really been through observation, is that ultimately all feedback is perfect. It is someone's perspective. Their perspective is their perspective. And the more we protect individuals from hearing people's perspective when they're in this safe environment of going through whatever program it is that you're running, then we're really doing them an incredible disservice. If we're not giving them all of the waypoints, all of the reference points by which they could make decisions to move forward, then we're not helping them. Because when they go out into the world, when they begin talking to customers, potential customers, to vendors, to employees, to anyone in the marketplace, they're going to suddenly begin getting feedback that they will not have heard before. And the feedback that they get won't always be right. And if we don't teach people how to sort of take in, how to receive feedback, how to process it, and then action it how appropriate, then we'll really not have progressed what they should have been doing as they go through our program. And so we really want to come from the perspective that all feedback is perfect. It may not be right, but it's perfect because it's someone's viewpoint, and it not taking it in puts all the other perspectives that they might receive out of balance, because they won't have considered, there's sort of some truth in every perspective, some truth for any individual. And if they don't hear each of those truths, then they won't have a more complete picture. And so, I don't think the problem is in feedback. I think it's in our problem to learn how to receive and filter and action feedback. That's really the issue. And the more we democratize this information, the more we share it broadly, the more people are going to learn. Again, going back to if we were in an art school, that all feedback is perfect. People listen and they ask questions. They dig down until they understand and have empathy so that they understand the individual across from them's perspective. In the entrepreneurship world, people tend to defend their perspective much more than learn from others' perspectives. And I think we can expand this considerably. We can learn and help our cohorts learn much more and much quicker. And so, in the words of Voltaire, if I haven't convinced you yet, hopefully this does, that the perfect is actually the enemy of the good. And so, if we wait until we get something perfect, if we wait until we get that perspective that is the $1,000,000 or $1,000,000,000 perspective, we likely will be waiting for far too long, and ultimately won't have heard the marketplace, because it's just it's so limiting to limit the perspectives that we will get to hear. So the venture orientation is going to look a little bit like the judges, but we'll add a few things. So we certainly need to know the objective and the context of the event. We need to know the criteria. We need to hear something about listening. We need to, if there's a Q&A session, the ventures need to know, the students or entrepreneurs need to know that there's a reason why people are asking each question, and that they need to answer the question that's being asked, not their own. They need to be prepared to take notes, because it's more often than not, as judges are asking questions, they also give advice. And so whether it's the person who pitched or a team member who's taking notes, that person should be available and be prepared to be taking notes immediately. And it's even better if they're visibly taking notes, because the judges will see that. And ultimately, this is a performance, and the performance is much more than just what the person does and says on stage. And so taking notes obviously helps us learn and internalize what's being said, and we want to be prepared to do that, because we won't remember afterwards, that's for sure. And then we have to learn how to respond to questions, and certainly not defending is key, but there are certainly many other good techniques. How to use and digest and action that feedback, and then how to follow up, if it's appropriate. Those types of things. So the venture, again, your list might be different, but these are some things you certainly want to consider when orienting the ventures. And if there is an orientation, normally it's just the judges, but we would certainly suggest that you also want to have a parallel orientation that happens to the ventures, because again, we want to set them up for success. And this is whether this is an internal team pitching to the executives, or sort of a cohort of teams pitching to potential investors, or in front of a fun and passionate group. And no matter what the sort of structure and audience of the event is, the making sure that we set people up for success as well as we can is absolutely critical. So the criteria development worksheet, this is a tool we developed, I suppose, about a year ago. We've had tons of organizations use it now. And what we're going to do when we send out this webinar is we're also going to send out to you a copy of the criteria development worksheet. And we certainly suggest that you use it, and we certainly would love any feedback. But I'm just going to quickly flip through this. So the idea, really simply, is to at first really kind of lay out what the event is, the pitch lengths, the type in terms of visual aids that are there. What's the purpose? Really identifying that, and this is more an exercise of making sure that it's clear in your mind what your purpose is. And then, of course, we're going to align the criteria with that purpose, and with the amount of time that people are going to pitch, so you have balance between quantitative and qualitative feedback. Then you're going to identify the critical elements, and from that you're going to evolve the specific criteria that will be used. And again, my point isn't necessarily to go through this in detail, but really to share this with you, and then again just to say that we'll send you out the electronic version when we send out this webinar. And if you're watching this webinar after sometime later than the live delivery, please go to our website. This is on both testmypitch.com and scoremypitch.com. You can download it from the resources page. So please do that. and certainly take advantage of it. So we're going to pop to questions here in just a moment, but before we do, two quick things to let you know about. Our next webinar is Tuesday, February 23rd, and it's going to be on 5 reasons why your training is failing and what to do about it. We've really learned a ton about this actually specifically over the last 6 months, but we've been in sort of the training world for 20 plus years. And but over the last 6 months, we've really seen some great examples of huge gaps in terms of how training can be more effective, and really what can be done very simply to improve the retention rate and the performance that comes from training. And so if this may be appropriate for you, we certainly invite you to come. You may know people who this is appropriate for, and we certainly would love for you to share this with them. And just so you know, within a day or two of this webinar, we're going to send you a couple of things. We'll send you the criteria development worksheet. We'll send you this webinar. And then we'll send you a survey, and we would love your feedback. Part of the survey is not only sort of getting, sort of your thoughts about this webinar, but also to hear from you what other topics would be valuable for you, and we'd love that. And we'll also, no surprise, we'll ask for a conversation, because we'd love to hear more about your goals. You came on this webinar for a reason, and we'd love to hear more about why that is, and if there's something we can do to help you accomplish your goals and help you in some way create better experiences and better results for the people you serve. And we'd really love to do that. So I'm gonna flip back onto the screen, and we're gonna get to your questions. So hold on for just a moment, and I'll come back on screen. Okay, so you should see me again. Hi there, everybody. Hope you're all well. Hope you're still awake and all that. So I'm just grabbing a piece of paper here with all these wonderful questions. Let's get down these. So the first one is, how do we get untrained judges to use rubrics reliably and quickly? So I think it's really two things. And obviously we could get more complex, but first is really around their orientation. Are you taking just a few minutes and making sure to orient your judges? And again, this could be the day of the event, or it could be pre-event with a quick conference call, or recording a video or whatnot, all fairly simple. And then the second is having a system, so that, again, whether it's paper or electronic, having a way that keeps them within the white lines, almost like, if you're driving a car, you want to, if you want people to stay on the road or not crash into each other, you put white lines on the road, and it's sort of the same thing. That's what a system does in terms of, keeping judges sort of congruent with the goals you have. So the next question is, how do we override judges' own biases? And I would suggest that the reason you invited them is specifically for their biases. Their biases are actually really important. And the one caveat to this, I should say, is that with all of my comments here, we're all coming from different frames of reference. So understand that I'm coming from a specific frame of reference. You may be playing a slightly different movie, and I'm happy to talk through your specific situation. But I would suggest in most cases that the judge's bias is really important, and that again, when whomever is being judged goes out into the marketplace, they're going to be faced with a marketplace that is full of individuals with biases, and those biases are really important. And it's important that we understand what biases are consistent and are ones we should respond to, and what biases are maybe outliers and less important for us to respond to. And it's ultimately the learning of that filter, the development of that muscle of the individuals that will be the most important outcome of any judging that happens. It's really building that muscle of being able to internalize and action feedback. I hope that helped, because I see that as a really important one, and one that organizations, I think, at times get stuck on. Encourage feedback is very important from our standpoint, and democratizing it. So let's see, how do we have an efficient system that taps into key competencies of students and is easy to understand by a diverse judge team? So really, first is I think about alignment is determining what your goals are, what outcomes you want, and aligning your criteria and your processes to that. And then, of course, that orientation, and then finally the democratization of those results, because ultimately the democratization of results, and what I mean by that is the sharing, sort of the unbiased, unfiltered sharing of results. It acts as a tool that not only educates and informs the current group that's being evaluated, but future groups and the community. And it's interesting, if we're, sort of in the entrepreneurship world, we resist this. But if we were in art school, or any type of creative endeavor, the notion of critiquing is huge, and that's a really big part of any type of arts education, is critiquing, and artists all day long get critiqued, and everything from films and movies to any type of the performing arts to the display arts. So all of those have a very active critiquing process that is part of the education process, and it's public. And the whole idea is that people are learning not only from their own feedbacks, but also the feedbacks of others. And so, just a thought. Let's see. This is a bit of a long one, so I'm going to just read it really quickly. So when judges are exposed to multiple pitches back to back, the baseline for how pitches are ranked starts to shift. If the first team has a strong performance, they might be scoring the one right after a bit more harshly compared to the rest. The same problem happens if the opposite happens, a weak team making an average performance after having inflated numbers. What happens is as judging scores are tallied up, they end up looking a bit skewed, and the judges would prefer to discuss the results versus relying purely on numeric scores. And this, we talked about this earlier, and there's certainly, it could be judges fatigue or that sort of natural phenomenon that happens as judges develop their baseline. And ultimately, it's about how do we develop reference points for judges, which is really, we haven't found a way on paper to do that. We built techniques and reference points into our electronic tool that give judges reference points that allow them to stay consistent all the way through, from whether that's they're evaluating 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pitches, all the way up to, we've had as many as 6 pitches, or I'm sorry, 60 pitches, actually 100 pitches on one scorecard used, and saw very little, if any, judge score skewing or fatiguing. And ultimately, again, it's about having reference points, and what you want judges to submit is a ballot that resembles their ranking of the teams. The scores are important, but they're secondarily important relative to the ranking. And the ranking, when you aggregate all the judges' ballots, ultimately that's what really becomes most informative. So hopefully that's helpful. We want to have reference points for the judges. That helps them stay consistent. So this next question, are there differences between criteria to evaluate pitch competition for adults in class or for adult in-class presentations? And I suppose this is versus student in-class presentations. I guess I wouldn't be so much concerned about the age of the participants as I'd be concerned about the stage of the participants. Sort of how sophisticated are they? Are they sort of nascent entrepreneurs or nascent inventors or innovators, or are they experienced? And I think the criteria get more sophisticated to match the audience, and you want to evolve the criteria more about the goals and the outcomes that you're looking for than you do sort of the age of the individuals. So hopefully that answered that question. How do you best create consistency in the overall application of criteria? Really just 2 words: orientation, context. You want to have a good orientation, and you want to have a very simple, direct context that's communicated consistently. How do you get all judges to use the same scale when completing the rubric? I think it's really having some type of formal technique or system. And again, that could be on paper or it could be electronic. But if they're all using the same system, then you should be able to stay consistent. And if you need examples of that, let us know. We're happy to share examples as well. So let's see. How do you adjust the criteria based on the audience? So I think you have to align with your goals. You have to determine your goals, and then those may be goals for your event or your community. They also may be goals for your pitchers, that might be students or staff or whatnot. But ultimately, be clear about your goals and then align everything else that you do to that. What are the top 3 steps to creating valuable criteria? So here are my 3. I'll throw them out. So determine the goal or purpose, and then determine what the most critical elements in attaining that goal are. So if you're trying to evaluate for sustainability, then what are the most critical elements that will tell you if this venture is sustainable or not? If you're trying to evaluate for scalability and fundability, what are the most critical elements in determining that? What are investors looking for? Or what's the marketplace looking for, depending on what you're trying to evaluate. And the third is, what's the sort of, and this is kind of simple, what's the ideal number of criteria? And again, this is really about keeping the balance between the quantitative and qualitative scoring that can happen, or feedback that can happen. Again, we've seen sort of ballots that go kind of overboard in terms of the number of criteria, and that tends to challenge the that text feedback that happens. You can always develop weighting that will help also with creating better results. So generally, not all criteria are should be equally stressed, and there are simple ways to develop and do weighting. Yeah, that's another idea. What makes criteria effective? 2 things: alignment and clarity. The more that they're aligned with the goals, and the more that you're clear in terms of how you express those criteria and share them, I think is key. So next question, a little bit long. As our programs have undergone various evolutions, first starting with rigorous and multiple, maybe even onerous criteria, we've had to water down our criteria in an attempt to get more people to take part in the program. This is frustrating, and in the end cheapens the program value. How do we create meaningful criteria that is both objective and simple? So I think what I'm hearing, and I may be misinterpreting or reading this, but you may even want to have maybe a few different sets of criteria, and actually have events that speak to specific audience at specific stages. So you certainly want to have engagement events that get people in to participate and get them back for their next experience. But then you want to evolve the experiences they're having, so that those people that are sort of more second level are getting feedback that aligns with somebody at second level, that's less sort of reinforcing and more substantive, so that they can propel forward. And so you may consider that. Ultimately you could sort of reboot, sort of scrap the criteria if you just want to have one set and one type, then kind of reboot and go through. Certainly use our process, if you like, to develop a new set of criteria that's maybe a compromise between those 2 issues of inclusion and substance. Hopefully that helped. So let's see, how to communicate criteria so that the judges interpret them in a way that they're meant to. Really this, and again, most organizations we see generally do a pretty good job of creating the criteria, and where we see the challenge is more to do with making sure that they, number one, have created context for those criteria, and that they've expressed them really clearly. And the context should precede the criteria. In other words, that frames the interpretation of those criteria, both for the judges and for the ventures and for the community. Let's see, how do we pick criteria that are correct? It's probably a little bit redundant, but alignment, that's simple. Be aligned with your objectives. how to adapt criteria to compensate for the natural irrational human factor. This doesn't really sound like a criteria problem to me. It sounds like a systems problem. It's about kind of what we talked about earlier, and having reference points so that as the judges are judging, that they can stay consistent with their past judging, so that what they've done acts as a reference point for what they will do. That will keep them much more rational, because ultimately the issue isn't that they're rational. We just haven't given them reference points to stay consistent is probably more the problem. So we can help a lot with that, and we'd be happy to. What are the most important elements to include in innovator or innovation assessment criteria? I would say number one is we'll share this template with you so that you can develop yours. We would also love to talk offline, and we can share some examples of innovator or innovation assessment criteria that we see used in a variety of communities. And anyone else that's interested in that information, let us know. But we're more than happy to have that conversation. But I would suggest that we need to probably take that offline, because we need to understand more about your goals. Just giving a sort of off-the-cuff answer won't probably help you. And then our last question here, and again, I'd encourage you, if you'd like to submit any questions, please do. But the last question here we have are, we are coordinating 2 grant processes this year. What are the best practices for judging and comparing proposals? So yeah, I mean, in a lot of our conversation here has been sort of about sort of live pitch evaluation and having good criteria. There's this whole other community that is doing a lot of work in terms of evaluating, sort of virtually evaluating information for decision making, which is just as important and key. So I would suggest there are 3 things that are important to this type of virtual selection, and it's just as important to any type of pitch event. And that is, we need to have judge selection that is good. It's like staffing, right? We want to, the best way to improve our company's quality is to improve our staffing. We want to make sure we hire the right people or onboard the right people who can give judging, sort of perform the judging in a way that we hope. Next is how do we orient them? So do we make sure that we give them the orientation so that they can perform well within the white lines that we've deemed? And then third is to have an independent way for them to judge and to score. So in other words, they shouldn't be influenced by other individuals. We ask them to come because we want their point of view. So the key really is to make sure that whatever system, it's the same thing as we do as Americans when we vote, is we have a secret ballot, and many countries have this. The reason we have a secret ballot is because we very much want each individual's point of view, and it's the aggregation of those points of view that help us make the best decisions. And so having that sort of secret ballot will help quite a bit. So this has been fantastic. Hopefully it's been helpful for you, and really encourage you to continue down this road. We are absolutely would be tickled pink to have additional conversations with you and help you with any specific questions you have or any other way that we can be helpful. We'd be happy to demo our tools for you. I think many of you would find some great advantage in terms of how the reliability of the judging that you now do in terms of how it's done with our tools. But again, we can have a conversation about that. So it is Friday. It's now afternoon on the East Coast, where I am, just turned afternoon. So I wish you all a super weekend. Again, we'll follow up, and certainly please let us know how else we can be of assistance to you. So thank you again so much, and wish you a great rest of the day. Bye for now.